to be more than before is to look at who you were and how you're going to do whatever it takes in order to make you be your true self. Redefine what is success. Don't think of success as financial parameters or how big your house is or what you drive. Think about it in the sense of, have you supported your children? Have you been the best husband you can be? Have you made work-life balance that really contributed to friends and family? Once you look at who you are, then you can be more than that.
Hey everyone, welcome back. My guest today is someone shaped by perspective, integrity, and resilience. Growing up across multiple cultures gave him a wide lens on the world. And those early experiences truly did help him to not only be who he is today, but discover who he is. He spent his career helping organizations operate with clarity, discipline, and stewardship. He's a CPA, an author, a podcaster, a father, and someone who truly does believe that how we operate reflects who we are. Duane Deason, welcome to More Than Before. How are you today?
Wow. Thank you, Nathan, for that wonderful introduction. I hope I live up to those expectations.
So you have a podcast, which was surprising to me. I don't know a lot of people in your industry that have a podcast. Tell us why you started that podcast.
Well, it was really a component of what I had put out with a book and how I was kind of transitioning my life, where I had gone from trying to be a hardcore consultant or going into companies and sometimes working with them for a year or two. And then I decided that it was really discouraging because I'd help a company for a year or two and then I'd go back and they were basically back to the same place where I had come 2 years ago. And so so I decided that I needed an approach to teach people how to fish and not just give them the fish. And so I wrote a book to try to create that knowledge. And then I also started a podcast. This is really focused on how to help companies manage costs, because a lot of them do it very poorly. And a lot of them start with headcount reductions and let people go, which really hurts a lot of families and is just terrible for an individual to be let go and have to deal with that. And there's a lot better ways to do it. And so I try to present what is really the more thoughtful approach and a little more contemplative approach to how to manage costs.
I love that. So take us back to growing up. Now, you traveled a lot growing up, all the way up until the age of 13. You were all over the world. What was early childhood like for you?
So I don't even remember being in the United States till I was, I guess, probably 7 or 8. For the most part, we were overseas that whole time. From starting at 6 months, so we were shipped off to South Africa. From there, we went to Saudi Arabia, we went to Sweden, we went back to Saudi Arabia, and then finally we did a tour in the United States. So I really had a very international perspective, didn't really look at the world the way a lot of people that don't get that opportunity to travel look at it. It was a great way to grow up, but it was also an adjustment to come back to my own country that really didn't have the same perspective that I had. But it was a great background. I wouldn't trade it for the world. It really gave me a perspective and taught me how to adjust and how to appreciate a lot of other cultures. And it was a great perspective, and I probably didn't really realize that or appreciate it until I got back to the United States. But I saw a lot of the world and a lot of different cultures, and it taught me how to adjust and not be judgmental to other people, regardless of their personalities. And when I went to school, it was international schools, and there was no norm. You didn't have to worry about who was popular or what music groups and those type of things. And so it was a great way to grow up. And I also got to see a lot of the world that I think a lot of people don't get to see, and really is gone now. Where I was in Saudi Arabia, where they just come across their oil money, and so but they were still all 2-story buildings across the country and in the middle of the deserts. And then same with later I went to China as a teenager, and it was basically, again, all very few high rises. They had built these big, beautiful highways with no cars on them. I remember watching during what they considered a rush hour, and looking down, I would see one car in the distance, and eventually it would come up and pass through, and that would be the only car you would see during rush hour. Yet they'd have these side bike lanes that were packed, and they were full of people. And there was one time I was exercising on my bike, trying to get a workout and get in shape, and they pulled me over for speeding on my 10 speed. Uh, and they told me I had to be more careful and I wasn't allowed to do that. So it was just a part of, I just saw a world that I don't even think exists today. And it was a great experience for someone who was younger and got to see that insight.
I love that. That's so funny that you were pulled over for speeding on a bike.
Yes. Yes. Never
Yeah,
thought it
I'm
happened.
curious, what were some of your lessons that like, I don't know what, age you were at when you went to Sweden, but how different was that compared to being Middle East?
So Sweden was wonderful because I was at 7, 8 years old, and basically, although it was cold much of the year, so you didn't get to wander around, but there was zero safety concerns. I just wander off, and neighbors were so nice, and it was just a wonderful culture to be a child in. They're very appreciative children, it's just a loving environment and a loving culture. Where in Saudi Arabia, I was on a compound, and you really didn't leave that compound on your own. I guess part of it was safety for children, but also part of it was just that we didn't want to insult their culture by our standards. For example, I went to snorkel in the Red Sea, and it was some of the most beautiful things you can imagine, because it was before a lot of the pollution had come around. So it was just like a rainbow in there when you're in the coral reefs. But women couldn't go there and wear bathing suits. That was not considered acceptable, and it was in fact it was considered an insult to their culture if we were to
Mhm.
take that approach. So it was a much more restrictive life to
Mm.
live in Saudi Arabia versus Sweden, kind of night and day.
That's interesting. So do you feel like that's actually helped you quite a bit in terms of navigating, America really is a melding pot of so many different cultures. Do you feel like that's actually helped you quite a bit later on in life to be able to navigate different cultures and to meet people where they are?
Yes, I would say later in life. So when I came back to the United States, I was shocked because I was so proud to be an American. And I came back, and the culture of seventh grade, eighth grade was only who was popular, what was the latest trends, and I didn't know any of that. So it was
Yeah.
actually quite a hard adjustment, and my hardest adjustment was to my own country when I
Mm.
came back here. But I certainly always appreciated the idea that later in life that I not only learned other cultures and could appreciate that, but I think the life of an immigrant is such that they are never really feel part of the new culture, and they've already left their old culture. There's some sort of limbo that they're in, and I've kind of
Mm.
felt like that as well, where I felt like I was never fully an American because I didn't grow up here and I didn't have that culture, but I had no other country that would really claim me. So you're
Yeah.
kind of in this limbo area, which I enjoy. I enjoy that aspect, and I relate to a lot of other people that are first or second generation immigrants. And that's because I can relate and understand their culture a little bit more than I think Americans that never experienced other cultures can really understand.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. So your parents, I would imagine you were very close with them growing up, especially, in that area or in that era of traveling so much. What were some of the early lessons that you learned from your mom and your dad?
So my father is that classic 50s, and I would say both of them are kind of that classic 50s where they believed in truth and honor. My father's the most honest man I've ever met. And he's only lied to me once in his life, and it was I because he borrowed my car, and he damaged it, and he started telling me this odd story, and I was just, for the moment, I said, my father for the first time in my life is lying to me, you know. But yeah, and you could tell he was so uncomfortable with it because he didn't want to. Obviously, there's something very embarrassing happened, and I even at the end of that story said, "Dad, someday you'll have to tell me the truth." But I had to respect that there was something very embarrassing to him that he felt like he couldn't share that. Extremely honest individual. My mother had grown up with a single mother, which in her day wasn't as common, and was a little bit more shunned. Who was an alcoholic, and so
Mm.
I had a lot of admiration for her because she kind of broke that chain where she did not have those demons, and was a wonderful mother. And so I was very fortunate that both my parents were very good, honest people that cared about their family. And you do spend a lot of time when you're in the foreign service with your family, and every 2 years that's all you have because you're starting all over again. And so it does put a lot of a reliance and appreciation for your family. And sometimes that's can be struggles, and
Mhm.
other times it's a really great thing.
What were you drawn to, in your earlier years of life? Were you drawn towards sports? Were you drawn towards education? Were you drawn towards art? Like, what captured your attention when you were younger?
So, because each country had a different offering, that I never adopted a specialty, you know. And when I was in Saudi Arabia, they had a wonderful swim team because year round you could swim, and so I was on the swim team. When Sweden, not so much, but but played ice hockey a little bit, but no, it was never really adapted that. And skiing was, cross country skiing was huge there, and so you basically had to adopt whatever that country had to offer. And so I would say I ended up being, and probably still to this day, a little bit of a jack of all trades, and
Mm,
not good at any. I was never gifted at anything, but I was always able to pick things up quickly, and get competent enough in whatever, whether it was a sport or subject, or in college, or any other aspect of life, really.
mm. So when you came back to the States, where did you start kind of falling into place? I know you were saying that you kind of felt like a little bit of the outsider. You come into the drama of, yeah, I was just saying this to someone the other day of like, kids they're not necessarily horrible, but they find things about you that are different than everyone else.
Mhm.
And then that becomes like your nickname. Like for you, where did you start to find yourself like throughout your later years in like high school, middle school, maybe even into college?
So when I first came back, and this back to a little bit of parents making some very good decisions. When I first came back, because I no one would really accept my difference and perspective on the world, and that I didn't really know who was cool, who was not. The only group that was really willing to accept me were usually troublemakers, or people that maybe were down the path of drugs and those type of things. And so I started going down that road, or at least that started to be my friend group,
Mm,
and so it was going to be trouble. We were only ninth grade, so you couldn't really get into the big trouble yet, but probably my parents realized where that was going, so they picked a post where I could go to boarding school, and so uh, I went to. They sent me to Kents Hill, Maine, which was just outside the capital of Augusta, Maine. In those years, it wasn't like we had the global warming then; it was cold, and it was on top of a hill, and you could not get into trouble there. It really straightened me out. And during one football season there, again, was never going to be very good at football, but I considered myself, my identity was there, and I broke my leg, and that was a turning point for me because it was one of those casts all the way from toe to butt, and it was couldn't it was hard to be crutching around in the middle of winter in Maine, and I had nothing to do. But I opened a textbook and I started to study, and it was a turning point for me because from that point on, I realized a lot of my pride and a lot of my self-esteem started coming from academic success, and that led to more interest and stimulation of an area that I really had not explored at all, and started got I wasn't too late to get into a decent school, and wasn't too late from there. I started doing really well and started getting into a good MBA program, got a really good job, and my life kind of turned around at that point.
Wow. That's really incredible, and it's funny because I don't know, there's, the way that we look at education today, I feel like we don't grasp, like, how to teach kids to love information, right?
Hmm.
It's kind of
Hmm.
not until you take everything away that they start to love, to read or to, get information. In fact, I was just realizing it was this morning actually, because I went in, my daughter, she's 6 right now, and she's reading pretty basic things, and I walked into her room and she's laying on her bed with her brother and she's reading out loud, and I'm thinking, "Oh my goodness. Like this is a good thing." And I
Yeah.
started to realize that, we don't do TV, we don't do video games games or anything there's no screen time. So what do they have? They have things that they can build, they have things they can put together, or they can read. Those are
Yep.
really their options. There's not really a whole much maybe some sports here and there. But, those opportunities that we give our kids can kind of get drowned out, like
Mhm.
education, those things with so many things that we have going on. I'm curious as you started to progress through your college years and starting to maybe identify a little bit more of what you desired to do. Actually, I think it's kind of interesting because you didn't originally go to school, did you, for being a CPA? What did you originally go to school for?
So during while I was at my college, you had 2 years of liberal arts, so you didn't have to pick your major, and so the I was standing in line in those days. That's how you enrolled for your new major. And so going into my junior year, standing in line, which they started at 8 o'clock, so you would have to get in line really early for us college people. That was a big deal, and like all good college students there, I was staying in line with one of my fraternity brothers, and we were sipping on a little alcohol. And had picked a major that was a brand new major called Computer Information Sciences. It was the first year being offered, and I was going to go and give it a try and that type of thing. And the fraternity brother that I was in line with, by the time the hour it took for us to get through, probably 2 hours, he had convinced me that accounting was a much more exciting. I don't know. You had to be drinking in order to kind of come to that logic, but he convinced me that that was the way to go forward with it, and I copied over his schedule onto mine, and enrolled in the same classes that he was in for that next semester. He never went to
Wow.
one of them. He took all my notes. He was a genius. But
That's really fun.
it was a life changing. It was
Yeah.
one of those forks in the road, standing in line, having drinks before picking a major, and I didn't realize that was going to change the rest of my career path. And it's interesting how little things that, if you're not careful, can change it for good or for worse.
Yeah. Oh man, that's so interesting, especially going into computer science, especially
Mm,
when that was the first
yeah.
it's interesting to think about that of how different your life might have been
Yes.
going into computer science versus accounting. I know a lot of accountants and it's funny cuz in their world of expertise, it doesn't feel like they're the most what would you say? Exciting people in the world.
Yeah.
But
Yep. Yeah.
they have outside lives too, and they have also interests. You actually at one point you rode your bike all the way across the United States.
Hmm.
Tell me how you came to that decision.
Yeah. And I very much agree with you on the whole accountant aspect of it. And I think what was interesting about that time is that we were a lot into client services, and they tended to try to attract people that were outgoing and energetic, and because that was who did best with the clients. But
Mm.
then they gave you really dry work, and so they gave these people that had this great energy and great capabilities, and I feel like it stifled it a little bit by not really challenging their employees. But so you
Mm.
had to find that in other ways. And so you picked other things that you enjoyed, and one of the things that I learned, and that I really appreciate, a great life lesson, is that between jobs, I never felt like I had to stop one job and the next week start another.
Mm.
I often, when I was done with something, when I felt like I had really reached the peak of that particular position, I was ready for something new. In many circumstances, I would take a couple months off, very common in Europe. And I would find something that I was very interested in doing. And so one of those was, sure enough, biking across the country. It was with a Christian group called Wandering Wheels. I remember that. And we would spend the nights in churches, from place to place. It was we went cheap. And the churches were always welcoming, and they were so fascinated by people coming through with that had different perspectives, because everyone on that bike trip was unique personalities and interesting. And just a great experience because I feel like I saw a part of America I probably never would have because we followed the old highway system. And on the old highway system, there were a lot of towns built that were really supported by the highway.
Mm,
And then that all, once those interstates came through where you didn't have to stop anymore, all those highway towns really started to suffer and really got kind of ignored. And so it was a great way to see kind of rural and forgotten America. A lot of good people out there and a lot of beauty.
mm. It's really fascinating because not only did you get to tour the world, but you've also toured a lot of the United States,
Mm,
which is also another rarity. I find that, most people, they grow up in the same town, they never
mm,
leave that town. And I was kind of like that for a little bit, up until college. I started off in Eugene, Oregon, nice little small town. Everyone knows it now from, the home of the Oregon Ducks. But way back when, it was really nothing really here in Oregon. And then when I moved up to college, I didn't realize that there was a large city that was close by, Portland. I
mm.
My world was just encapsulated in this small little town. And what's really fascinating to me is you really got to experience a large part of the world. And then you came back to the United States, which is actually huge,
Mm.
and you got to travel and see parts of the United States. What were some of those key moments of getting to travel with the wandering wheels? What were some of those experiences that really anchored in maybe some lessons later on that you would really start to apply?
I think what there's a lot to learn from what different people from different perspectives can offer you. Because if you live in the world of, let's say, accounting, and though you're right, there's kind of there's a stereotype there, and it's for a reason. And you start to be hang around people that have your thought process, your pattern, your belief system, and I feel like you can kind of stifle your growth that way. And by whether it was me growing up and seeing all the cultures, whether it was me doing a lot of different activities. Another one I really stands out to me is I scuba dived in the Great Barrier Reef. It,
Mm,
and when you went out there, you did days where you dove, 4 or 5 times a day. You were diving, 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 and I did that for a few weeks, and it was just all these different things. You really learn where you fit in the world, and it's humbling because it's not like it's not where you feel like you are king of your hill. There's no that's not it at all. You are a small grain of sand in this big world, and all you can do is try to treat people well, try to be true to yourself, and follow principles that really make you are at your end of days going to feel like you had done what you could in this world and leave proud.
mm,
There's you can't take the money with you. I mean, you always love your children, but you can't support them afterwards. All that you can do is give them what you can now. So
mm.
I really feel like I gained a lot of that perspective through all the different things I've done that that gave me more of a well-rounded perspective.
Mm. I love that. And then at one point, you decided to start a business.
Mm.
I think some of the most insane people are those that say, you know what, I have an idea. I'm going to go work for myself. Tell us a little bit about that decision to start your own business and to start building that.
Sometimes I'd say good and bad things can happen, and sometimes they can both be catalysts to interesting opportunities. So I had a boss that I didn't feel that was all that great. Wasn't I didn't feel I had a lot of respect for him, and I didn't feel he treated employees particularly well. And so I just said, I'm going to try to do this on my own. I was being successful and helping to bring a lot of revenue, and I was decided, well, why don't I just hang out my own shingle and see what happens? And sure enough, I was 27 at the time, and so that was kind of gutsy, and did not have a lot of money to my name to try to start a business, but it went really well. And over the next, gosh, I think I sold it after 6, 7 years, and at that company, and we weren't a huge firm or if you heard huge company, but we were a tight knit group. Really enjoyed working with that group. I tried to give them what I didn't have, which as far as trying to really be good to them and try to be and treat them fairly. And I had a great experience on that, and after that, it changed really. I can't go back to working for somebody that I just didn't enjoy, that I didn't that I doing work that I just really didn't feel like helped people. And so after that, I've started several businesses. I've worked for myself most of my career, and it's been very rewarding to me.
It is interesting because once you kind of start out on your own, you realize how much work you're putting into things.
Mm,
And as you kind of go down that road, there's a crucible moment in life that you get to choose whether or not you're going to be a father that
mm,
is present or whether you're going to be a business person that's present. And
mm,
obviously, you can juggle both, but you have to choose in the world what you want to be known as. That was
yeah,
a crucible moment from what I understand for you is, when you had your first child of
yeah.
something needs to change. Tell us a little bit about that crucible moment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was defining my success by my financial accomplishments and whether I was able to have a business and those type of things. And sure enough, that I would argue that you don't know what love is until truly until you have a child, where you realize that you are everything to them, and if you fail them, they can't succeed. And so the pressure on that, and the fear of not being what you need to be for them, it changes your life. And all of a sudden, I could not be the person I had been, and it was transformative because after a while, I realized I really didn't like that old guy, the one who was working all those hours. And there were years where I didn't take a vacation because I didn't have an opportunity to do that. But what I knew is that I needed to be there for my son. There was my wife had some complications after birth, and so so I took time off from my projects, and I took care of him, and I had a bond that I will never forget, that I will always appreciate it, and changed my life. And
Mm.
he did more for me than I've done for him, just by what he has given me in order to learn all what is important of life.
Mm. There really is a fascinating correlation between having kids and having a business.
Mm,
Like there are some really important aspects that we can learn, but there's also this piece I find that when people have a family and they have a business, sometimes they lose perspective on one or the other. I'm curious, as you look back now on your journey in life, what would you tell yourself as the early business owner and having, your son? What would you tell yourself now or back then what you know now of,
mhm.
taking maybe it was taking the vacation or spending that time. What would you tell yourself?
Yeah, I think I would be tell myself to be comfortable with my decision. I think at the time I was very conflicted because I felt like I had all these opportunities, and actually a good part of that was during the financial crisis. So things weren't going well. That all my investments, were losing tons of money, and so it was a very scary time. And I remember just being worried that was I doing the right thing by spending the time with my family, with my son, trying to take care of him while my wife was recovering, or was the right answer to support them to
Mm,
get back out there so that to make sure that I secured financially their well being. Was that which role should I have to play? And I think in the end it was you have to tell yourself, or I wish I could tell myself, it's going to be okay. You're doing what's right. And if you do what's right, the other pieces will fall into place. And
mm.
I wish I had was more at peace at that time with the decision I was making and not quite as stressed. But I made the right decision, and I'm very thankful for that.
What were some of the qualities that you learned early on in life that really helped propel you to be successful in your career and also in your relationship with your family?
Mm. So my dad was a hard worker, and he wasn't afraid to work me hard. So I learned from him how to accomplish things and get things done and to dig deep. He was an avid gardener, and he'd have me out on the weekends while my friends were out playing. He would have me, uh, you know, planting things, doing all the yard work, whatever it took, or that type of thing. And I was at the time very resentful of it, but now I look back and it taught me a work ethic that I very much appreciate. That I
Mm.
and I did was able to apply later. In fact, if anything, it's almost too much so that I tried to have to, how do I dial that back after a while? How do I, because you bring that home.
Yeah.
I at work, it was, yes, it was very useful to be at work and go and always accomplishing things and driving and pushing people. But you got to be careful. If you bring that home with you, it can be a real challenge for the family to have to deal with that. They what they need is love, nurturing, and support, and they don't need the same environment that you are at work, the same personality you are at work, in order to try to accomplish things at home.
Mm.
That's not. It doesn't make for a successful transition. You have to find out, this is me at work and this is me at home, and they need to be two different things.
Mm. How do you balance being married and also having a business? Because a lot of people that have a business, essentially, they're married to their work,
Yeah.
and sometimes work kind of takes over the relationship from home. Kind of like we were saying, you kind of have to put that divide between who you are at work and who you are at home. You're the same person, but it's a different relationship, right? How
Mhm.
how have you been able to balance both of those things out?
Yeah. Well, and I have to confess, because maybe I didn't, because I am divorced.
Okay.
Maybe that was kind of part of it. And things fell apart during COVID, and some of the challenges that brought about for when everyone's working from home and being at home. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I can claim success in that area. Um, but I think I do I do think that I probably learned later that the time, you have to make time for everything.
Mm.
And you have to, and particularly though, you have to choose your priorities. And if your priorities are going to be, I'm going to be at work and I'm going to miss important events, or I'm not going to give friends and family and particularly a spouse quality time, it's not going to work out. It's
Yeah.
very hard. It's a very tough formula. If you've chosen your career over your family, you've decided that you're not going to have a great family and home relationship. And so that was a big part of what I decided I was going to change early when my son was born. And it's work in progress.
Mm.
I can't claim that I would let it all go and I've been chill ever since my son was born. No, I back and forth. I'm still, when in many still doing business, wrote a book, out there doing totally different things. It's a priority to me, and I still have to fight that battle not to let myself get drawn back into that world and make it my only world.
I love that so much. And I love that you bring up that, maybe I didn't do it well, as I look
Yeah.
at the results, because I think sometimes we get so far in our life that we forget to actually analyze, well, what went right, what went wrong. It's easy to go, what went right.
Yeah.
Sometimes you forget to go, well, why did things fall off the rail? But what's really interesting to me is even hearing you talk about your past of, being able to travel around, get to experience a lot of different small towns and businesses.
Mm.
You also got to experience that as you were riding across the country, experiencing small towns and businesses.
Mhm.
There's something that's stuck within that because you have a passion and you have a fire for small business. What
Mhm.
is it about the small business that just really grabs your attention?
Yeah. So when I first started my career, that's almost all I was working with, was smaller businesses, or when I should say, when I started my first business at 27. Um, and I loved it.
Mm.
There's a passion with people that are starting businesses. There's a hunger they have, and it's a great community, and they're supportive, and they're all rowing in the same direction. And what became kind of unfortunate is, after I started to get into more helping companies control costs, it was the bigger companies that were having the most trouble with that. And
Mm.
so I started to get sucked in more and more to larger companies. And I still miss the smaller companies, because that was I felt like it was more me. It was more my identity. Now I could think what I do is much more applicable to larger companies. And I had a much bigger impact to those companies. And they are very broken. When you lift the hood of a company and you think you're going to see some sort of nice clean engine, No, no, sir. It is like a Frankenstein of parts that you don't know how that thing's working, and so there's so much opportunity, and the bigger the business, the more um, um, challenges there are in that engine. Um,
Mm,
and the smaller the business is, they're humming. And
mm,
one of the things I put in my book is that you can take an innovative group, your research and development group from a startup that is doing great things, and if you drop them into a large company, into a behemoth company, their productivity and their innovation will plummet. And that's
mm,
because that they are not that there's something about that small business environment that just breeds success. And that I think that's why you see so many of the large successful companies. They're not 100-year-old companies. They are new technology companies that rose from nothing, and some of them in a very short period of time, creating some of the richest men and people in the world.
mm.
And it's because of that innovation and that startup environment that I think in some ways the United States has almost over anyone else.
Mm. Well, it's interesting that you talk about that because when you look at large business, there's so much waste. Like there's all these things that get kind of over the years. You get different systems and things in place, and the system supposedly serves a purpose. But then
Mhm.
after a while, it's never questioned, and you continue using the same thing over and over. But yet maybe something else comes out. It kind of reminds me almost as like Zoom, right? Before COVID, Zoom wasn't a thing. Yeah,
Right.
I was using Zoom. I had a professional account, which really drove me nuts because as soon as everyone decided to download Zoom, they weren't doing so hot when
Right,
they had
right,
that many
right.
people. But all of a sudden, COVID revealed some problems within companies, and they started going, "Well, what if we could raise productivity instead of doing meetings where everyone's going to the same place? What
Mhm.
if we just had a meeting virtually?" And
Yep,
all of a sudden, that really helped a lot of different companies to go, well, we could actually, maybe we have remote employees, or maybe we do this, maybe we do that. Now, that also adds complications to a business and getting
yep.
engagement and all those things. I'm curious, the book, Operationally Svelte, which Svelte, I love the word, by the way.
Thank you, thank you. 'Cause a
But
lot of people
actually,
don't get that.
yeah, I think maybe that might be a good thing because I think some of the people listening right are like, what did he just say? Svelte?
Mhm.
What does it mean to be svelte? Can you define that for everyone listening?
So svelte is a way of just being kind of lean and attractive, and it just there was so much when you looked at books that would talk about lean management and lean marketing and lean those type. There's millions of them lean, and so I wanted something that conveyed something slightly different, because not only lean but attractive, and it's weird that you would say attractive, because why is it important for a company to be attractive? And a company wants to be attractive, because if you are, you get better employees there. Your customers are more likely to go there. Investors are more likely to go there, because it's part of, um, if you're an attractive company, you're more successful because you treat your employees better. That's part of being attractive. So what the formula for being attractive is being starts with being good to your employees, being good to your customers, being good to your investors. And if you have that formula, then you're much more likely to succeed. And it actually is a cost savings. I
Mm,
don't have to pay someone extra to come to work because they hate to be there. No,
yeah.
I can pay them normal wages because they like to be there, and I'm giving them a stimulating environment as long as I'm fair to them. So being an attractive company, being svelte, I felt was a important component that a lot of people that in my industry forget. They just focus on, how do I cut costs? How do I get them down to the bare bones? And that's really not the philosophy that I follow.
Mm. Unpack that a little bit more. I think I love that you say that. That's not necessarily the philosophy to get it down to the bare bones, but it's actually from what I'm understanding and you saying in your book, it's really about understanding what are the most important things that you can use to operate efficiently, and not necessarily that you are trimming out every single thing in your company, in your business, but it's about how do we operate within this business in a very wise way.
Mhm. Exactly. And I think a lot of companies, they try to say, I'm going to cut costs so I can be more profitable. And I feel like that they've missed something in between. It's okay to cut costs if you do it wisely, and makes the company more efficient. But really, it should be to unleash growth and innovation, because an efficient company is more capable.
Mm,
Just as an athlete, when if an athlete is bloated and is not working out and not accomplishing things, eating well, it affects their performance. So you really want a company that is operating lean and efficiently and svelte in order to try to really have the most potential that it can, and that it can reach, and try to reach that growth and and sure, profitability can come along as well. That will follow properly. But if your only reason is to cut costs is to try to increase profit, I think you're missing an opportunity. You can
mm,
cut costs in order to put that money into more innovation and more into growth, and more into the business that would make something better than it was going to be before, and not just some extra money that you get to whether dish it out to dividends or shareholders or something of that order.
mm. You know what's fascinating? Because I love what you're saying about this because it also really does apply for those of you guys that are listening. And you're like, oh, okay, I don't, I'm not in the business world. I don't know what we're talking about. But this actually is very applicable to life itself too. Is that in your life, are you operating svelte? Are you
Mhm.
operating in a way that you're not trying to just get more, trying to add more into your life because the heavier you are in life, not just physically, but
Yes.
mentally and
Yep.
spiritually and all these different areas, the heavier you are, the harder it is to shift. In fact, kind of with what you were saying earlier about like the startup companies, the reason why startup companies do so well is because they don't have a huge operational budget. They're
Yep.
constantly trying to figure out, well, how can we get the most out of this investment? Is there something new in the market that we can apply right now that will actually help us to get ahead versus trying to throw money at a problem? I'm curious for you, Dwayne, in your life, where have you felt the biggest area of really maybe trimming off over the past maybe 5 years? Where have you started to shift in the way that you think about operationally in your life?
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that, because we're trying to make that transition, because I thought about writing a book called "Svelte for Life," and because I do feel like that those same lessons about being lean and having a life that is simple and focused, I do think makes for more success.
Mm,
And so what I try to do in my daily life is I try to decide what is important, and from that, what activities I'm going to do that fulfill that. And I'm going to try not to let myself get distracted by things that I would later not really appreciate, and not really find that I felt good about what is to whether I'm accomplishing something. And sometimes it's as simple as I start to, if I'm going to watch a series on Netflix, what else can I do at that time? What else is important, that is important to me? Do I need to have, like, I thought about, do I want a beach house or something that I could get away from? And maybe that has some the beautiful aspects of it, that I can be at the beach more. But I'm trying to keep a simplified life, because I feel like if you keep your life lean, you have more time to give to what really matters to you. So I
mm,
I do try to believe that I try to live what I consider a svelte life, and I think it feels great. I feel like I'm able to accomplish what's important to me.
mm. I'm curious. There's a quote I recently heard that boredom stokes creativity,
Mm,
and I absolutely love that because
mm,
I think there's a lot of merit to that. I'm
yeah.
curious, how has creativity played a part in your life? Why is creativity important in what you do?
I think what I liked about, and this is interesting about being in a world with accountants, is they're not known to be the most creative group, and so I from a creative aspect, I'm like. I'd probably be considered, pretty stellar. But I go to some of those marketing groups. They're like, oof. but I think part of that is recognizing things that aren't working,
Mm,
there's you can do that in the business world where what isn't really working for a company, what isn't really working for a department or a function, and how are you going to improve that? But that's exactly what you can apply at home. You can say what is not you take the same philosophy. What is not working at home, and
mm,
how am I going to fix that? And what am I? How can I contribute to that solution? And so I think that's the fundamental of creativity is kind of how can you understand and create a solution and sometimes out of the box. Sometimes it's not can't. Sometimes they're not easy, but how do you find a creative solution to solve problems? And that's helped me in business and it's helped me in life. So
mm.
I agree with you that creativity is an important trait.
There are so many things about your life that are really fascinating to me, from the traveling to being able to. I think cycling is pretty crazy in
Mm,
itself. There's a mental aspect of that,
yep.
numbers and doing anything accounting wise. There's a kind of insanity about that. When you were saying creativity, I was thinking of I had recently just saw that there's like a an Excel spreadsheets like world championship. Didn't even know that was a thing, but evidently if you love spreadsheets and you wanna be the best of the best, there's a place you can go for that. You have so many different areas that enrich your life, even like beekeeping, like
Yes. Yes.
what is it about exploring life that actually gives life?
Mm. Yeah, I think you have to, at least what my perspective is that I try to look and say, well, what part of my life could use work? And
Mm,
and how am I giving back or how am I getting in touch with nature? And that's how the beekeeping thing came about. Because in many ways that keeping bees, it's a beautiful in business. Much harder than you would think. You think you just set those bees in a little hive and everybody's happy. No, no, no. They need care, quite a bit of care. But they're hardworking and I could just sit out there and just be listen to them and watch them go, and they're amazingly gentle.
mm.
The bees. I mean, it depends. It obviously depends on the hive, but mine were you can you if you once they get used to you, I could have my bare hand and just rub the back of them and they wouldn't sting me.
Mm.
And so so in some ways it does kind of bring you back to nature a little bit there. It kind of puts you in touch with a part of the world that you weren't in touch with before. Um, Beekeepers are a unique and beautiful human beings. They're fantastic, and they care about the environment. They care about their craft, and they act. Those bees are like children to them. They
Mm.
care very much about them. So it's just another facet to round out your life, to find a different dimension to your life.
Mm. What were some of those lessons? I'm curious. There's one other person I've met who was a beekeeper. What lessons have you learned from beekeeping that truly do stand out and have actually helped you in, it sounds strange, but in your interpersonal relationships with other people?
Right, right. Well, I would say that the thing that surprised me about the bees was just that I felt like I could pull up a lawn chair and just sit there and let them kind of do their thing and this with the sound they made and just watching them. It's a very peaceful, blissful moment.
Mm.
If you ever try to take their honey, it's a very different relationship. I'll tell you that. The relationship changes very quickly. Um, and so we tried to do that one. I volunteer at a church that keeps beehives, and they had 7 of them, and we just started too late, and so it was dark. We were trying to take their, and those bees were furious, and so I got stung all over the place on that day. So I kind of learned both spectrums of what life's about, and that's true with people. People, if you treat them well, and if if you're helping them, they can be beautiful and kind and appreciative. And
Mm.
if you try to take something that is important to them and hurt them, then like those bees, they're going to be very angry, and you're going to see a different side of them. It's the same
Mm.
bee. It's just that in some ways, you're the one that has changed the environment, not them.
Yeah. Oh, that's
Mhm.
so cool. I love that. It's such a beautiful picture too.
Uh,
Uh, This has been such a powerful conversation. I have a couple more questions for you. Um, One of those being, how has faith played a role in your life? Like when did faith really become a big thing for you, and like in terms of owning that, and how has that continued to be a focal point in your life?
Yeah. So faith is it's had several different phases, I guess, in my life. So faith, I think I would in during college, I up until that point, I had gone to church with my family. It had been part of our lives, but it was something I did because my parents took me there. It wasn't some and it was interesting in college changed where I became a Christian. And when I mentioned, I was a fraternity brother. I mean, we were living that lifestyle and it was interesting that there's many lessons I remember so distinctly from that time because I changed a lot of my lifestyle at that point and was much more. I stopped drinking. I was much more considerate with females and those type of things, and I felt so much better about who I was at that time. And it was kind of
Mm.
interesting that one of the parts I look back at that time because I've drifted. I don't go to church very often now, and it's interesting that I look back at that time and I have to remind myself that why, if there wasn't something to faith, that I feel so good about what I was doing.
Mm.
Why did it feel so right? And so I had that aspect of it that I really uh, will never forget.
Mm.
From that aspect of it. But it's ebbed and flowed through my life. Types, and I see faith a lot of different times. Where I remember once as a sunrise, just feeling the sun on my face and a feeling like there was a presence there, and that I really knew at that moment. I can't deny I feel a presence. And so there's an aspect of a faith I can't put my finger on, and it's still a relationship I'm still forming.
I love that. Dwayne, so many great things that you've said today. One more question I have for you is, what does it mean to be more than before? It's a concept I love. It's a concept I live with all the time because
Mhm.
it's my business. But I'm curious, what does that mean to you to be more than before?
So I love that title about it. And it's interesting. I actually thought of that. I thought about that a little bit before we even got on, and it's when I look at my life, I think that it wasn't that hard to be more than before
Mm.
for me, because when I look at before, I look at somebody who was lost in a world of work and not really making life the priority it ought to be, not really treating people necessarily as well as
Mm.
as I needed to. And I look at that person, it's not hard to be more than that because I just don't think that that person was really accomplishing what I think was important in life. And so I think to be more than before, I think, is to look at who you were and how you're going to do whatever it takes in order to make you be your true self, to be really redefine what is success. Don't think of success as financial parameters or how big your house is or what you drive. Think about it in the sense of, have you supported your children? Have you been the best husband you can be? Have you made a work-life balance that really contributed to friends and family? And those type of things, I think once you look at who you are, then you can be more than that. But if you don't
Mm.
examine that, it's so easy to follow that same pattern and not be more than before.
Dwayne, thank you so much for your story, your wisdom, your heart behind your work. This conversation truly has been powerful and a reminder of how we operate personally and professionally, and how that really does reflect who we are. Who you are, who you're showing up to as today is important. If today's episode resonates with you, make sure that you check out Dwayne's brand new book, Operationally Svelte. Connect with him through the Efficacy Group. Dwayne, thank you again for being here, for adding so much value to all of us. And for everyone else, if this episode challenged you and encouraged you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Until next time, remember to be more, see more, and experience more than before.